Alright, what's going on everyone? And welcome to the series in which I introduce you to all of the most powerful competitive decks in the modern format. The goal here isn't to give you an exact deck list as those change constantly, but rather to give you a brief overview of how the deck works so you can be prepared if you're new to the format or if you're interested in getting into it. So today we're looking at Dimir Mill. I never thought I'd see the day where Mill is actually a top tier deck, but here we are. Dimir Mill, actually a tier 1 deck, one of the best decks in Modern. Kinda crazy, but welcome to Modern. So Modern Mill uses 2 creatures and 2 creatures only, and that's a playset of 2 Crabby Boys. Hedron and Ruin Crab are basically the same creature. They're 1 mana 0/3s that will mill 3 cards every time a land enters the battlefield under your control. So play a land, mill 3 per crab. If you have 3 crabs, it's 9 cards every single time you play a land. So that's already pretty crazy. And then, of course, this is Modern, so we have fetch lands, so you can get these triggers multiple times per turn. So you get 8 copies of this effect and many ways to trigger them multiple times per turn, which is pretty crazy. And also the deck is a Lurrus deck because why not? Lurrus says that you can't play permanents that cost 2 or less, but there's literally only 2 permanents in the deck. That's the 2 crabs, so there's no drawback to putting Lurrus in the sideboard and being able to potentially recast them. So Lurrus in the sideboard, of course. In terms of mill spells, the deck plays Fractured Sanity, Archive Trap, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. The first mills 14 cards for 3 mana, which is a lot of cards, and it can also be cycled if you need to draw more cards, if you really need a removal spell or whatever. You could cycle it and you still mill 4 even if you do that. Archive Trap mills 13 cards. It costs 5, however, you can cast it for 0 if the opponent searches their library. And once again, this is Modern. Most decks have fetch lands, so your opponent cracks a fetch, searches for a land, and your Archive Trap costs 0, milling 13 cards for no mana. And then the Laughter mills until the opponent has exiled a total mana value of 20. So this might seem weak because what if the opponent just mills a bunch of high cost cards, right? Like what if they just hit like a 7 and a 6 and a 5 drop and you're already almost done? It's not very many cards, but remember that this is Modern. Most cards in the format cost 1 or 2 mana. I mean, Modern is a format of Lurrus decks where people literally can't play permanents that cost 3 or more. So Modern is fast, it's aggressive, it's well tuned, lots of cheap efficient spells. So this actually hits a ton of cards. And even if a deck is playing some high cost spells like Amulet Titan plays Primeval Titan, for example, those decks that play those types of cards also tend to play a ton of lands, like 28 to 30 lands, and lands have a mana value of 0. So even though those decks do have some high cost cards in them, they also have a ton of lands that you just rip through with the Tasha's Hideous Laughter. So basically Tasha's Hideous Laughter mills a bazillion cards, and all of these cards mill tons of cards for 1 card. It's kind of crazy. Modern Mill, you can mill a bunch of cards really fast, as you can see. The deck also frequently plays Surgical Extraction and Crypt Inversion. So the extraction, you name a card and then you get to search through the opponent's deck for those cards and exile them. So this not only allows you to gut your opponent's deck if they're built around a specific card, like if they need a card to win, you just name that and you kind of turn their deck off. So that's useful, but it can also extract their most expensive spells. So again, Primeval Titan, a good example. Amulet Titan is one of the most popular decks in the format. We haven't covered that yet, but maybe eventually. But Primeval Titan, 6 mana, and if you know you're against that deck, you can name Primeval Titan and get all those 6 drops out, so then your Tasha's Hideous Laughters are more powerful. Plus it sort of mills, because if you get 3 or 4 Titans when you do it, you're basically milling their deck for 3 or 4 cards. And as for Crypt Incursion, you exile all creatures in a graveyard, and then you gain 3 life for each card exiled. So basically, it allows you to gain 1,000,000 life against creature-based aggro decks. You mill through like half their deck, and then when you're on the verge of death, you play this, you exile all their creatures, which should be a lot because they're a creature-based aggro deck. You might gain 20 or 30 life, and that gives you more time to mill them out. So that's nice. It also gives you an answer for graveyard strategies like a Dredge, for example. If you're playing against a Dredge deck or any deck that likes to play from the graveyard, they want their library into their graveyard, right? Dredge wants to flip its library into its graveyard, so it's happy if you mill them. Like, mill them, they love it. So you have a main deck answer for decks that get better when you mill them, basically. So the deck also takes advantage of the opponent having a large graveyard with things like Visions from Beyond and Drown in the Loch. So Visions from Beyond lets you draw a card for 1 mana unless the opponent has 20 cards in the graveyard, then you draw 3. So this essentially makes it an Ancestral Recall in Modern, and Ancestral Recall, of course, being a part of the Power 9, the 9 most powerful Magic cards ever printed. So you kind of get to play a Power 9 card in Modern, sort of, with Visions from Beyond. So that's pretty good. And then Drown in the Loch, also crazy. 2 mana to kill basically any creature or counter any spell. It needs to have a mana value less than the opponent's graveyard count, which is usually quite large. So in this deck, it's basically 2 mana, kill anything or counter anything, which is pretty crazy. You'll also find other random control spells, usually Fatal Push, but you also sometimes see like Murderous Cut, Into the Story, stuff like this. All common. Fatal Push, removal spell. Murderous Cut, also a removal spell that can dredge to make it cheaper. Into the Story is a great card draw spell. Murderous Cut and Into the Story not always played, but it's like 50-50. You see them sometimes you don't. You also sometimes find Mesmeric Orb in these decks. This is not super common, but it does see play. You do see it sometimes. It's a 2 mana artifact and it mills for every permanent that untaps. It might not seem like much, but keep in mind this counts lands untapping. So if you play it and they have 3 or 4 lands tapped, at the very least it's going to mill 3 or 4, and it's going to continue to mill every single time the opponent taps for anything, whether they're casting spells, whether they're attacking, whatever. Anything that taps is going to ultimately lead to a milled card when they untap. And this is actually pretty cool. It can actually kind of lock the opponent out of killing you, because if their library count gets too low, they might not be able to cast anything without milling themselves out. Like if they have like 10 cards left, it gets dangerous for them to start casting stuff because the Mesmeric Orbs can mill them out, and you can have multiples of them too. They're not legendary, so it's pretty good. There are also a couple notable lands in this deck. Oboro Palace of the Clouds is crazy. It's a land that you can pay 1 mana to return it to your hand, and this ensures that you always have lands for the crabs. If you don't draw a land, you just tap this, you tap the land, use the land to return itself, and then replay it for your land per turn, and that allows you to re-trigger your crabs. So you basically have a guaranteed trigger for the crabs every single turn. Shelldock Isle is also pretty common. When you play it, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, you grab a card, and you exile it under the island, and then if your opponent has 20 or less cards, you can pay a single blue mana, tap it to cast the spell for free. So it's a land that gives you a free card if your opponent is at 20 cards or less. So you typically see it in this deck. And that is Dimir Mill. You get to play a ton of crabs that mill like crazy. You get some of the most powerful mill cards ever printed with some amazing draw spells and control magic. It's kind of crazy. It really is kind of surprising just how powerful these mill decks have become. It seemed to start happening after they officially named mill as a keyword. Like they named mill as an official keyword. They started printing it on cards, and they really seemed to start pushing the mechanic after that to make it competitive, and it worked. We got some crazy stuff in Modern Horizons, and now Dimir Mill is a top tier competitive deck. So there you go, everyone. If you get matched up against this deck, just know that your library probably isn't long for this world, because Dimir Mill can just make it vanish in no time. So there you go, Dimir Mill. If you like this video, I have a full playlist dedicated to these modern deck guides, and you can find a link to it in the description below or on the end screen that you're about to see. So check that out for more videos like this. I will also leave links to various metagame pages for this deck, so you can see the most up-to-date deck list as well as the different variations of the deck. So be sure to check that out. Check out the playlist, and in the meantime, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.